Hello everyone. I'll show you a great positional game played by Wesley So in 2011, and it was played against Alexey Shirov in a 5-player tournament played in Sweden, which Wesley So actually won. He had 3 points out of 5 games, and Shirov came in third. Anish Giri was second. So a 5-game is not so many games in a tournament to determine the exact winner, of course, and having 3 such strong players makes it difficult for having to have one in clear first. But this game is, regardless of the tournament, this is one of Wesley's best positional games, and in it is one of my most favorite moves ever played by Wesley. So it's not a sacrifice, it's not an attractive move, but positionally it's absolutely brilliant, and it could compare to Shirov's bishop sacrifice, if you remember that endgame. So we have d4. Let me just turn on the sound, sorry. So d4 by Wesley So, he had the white pieces. Alexey Shirov played d5. And after c4, c6, we have the Slav defense, knight to f3, knight to f6. We have e3 by Wesley So, which is the quiet variation of the Slav defense. And now, of course, the issue in this variation is that white hasn't developed the bishop yet from c1, so it's stuck behind its own pawn chain, and white is going to have to develop it differently. But it's by no means worse than any other Slav variation, and the position is just slightly better for white. We have e6 by black. In this position, perhaps bishop to d6 could be played as well. I'm sorry, not bishop to d6, knight to d7. That could be played as well, and e6 is just the most solid way and the most common way to play the Slav defense. So now after e6, b3, knight to d7 now, bishop to d3, bishop to d6, normal development from both sides. And if you know anything about the Slav defense, then I usually play it with black against d4, so the main issue in the position is this bishop stuck on c8. And even though you have a very solid central position and white isn't that fast to get to your king, you're going to have to do something radical in order to develop your bishop. Now, the most common plan in a lot of Slav positions is for black to capture on c4 when the bishop is on d3, so that you gain a tempo, and after bishop takes c4 you play b5, and after that you have a plan of playing either a6, c5 or simply c5, even sacrificing a pawn or a central pawn. And white will commonly, not in the silent variation, but in some semi-Slavs and some round positions, push for e4. So you should notice what Alexey Shirov is doing with his light squared bishop. That's the common theme for black in this opening. Now we have bishop to b2. Wesley is fianchettoing the bishop, and of course this means that he has intentions of relieving this pawn tension here in the center, and that's usually achieved with the move knight to e5 by white. And in fact, after queen to e7, Wesley plays knight to e5 immediately. Now, if at any point black should capture this knight, whether it be with the bishop or with the knight, of course for now it's defended, so it could hang a piece, but afterwards this would open up the strong diagonal for black's bishop, and the bishop pair would be too strong, of course, especially compared to this bishop on c8. Now we have bishop to b4 check, knight to d2 covering the check, knight takes e5, d takes e5, and now we can see already after the knight retreats to d7 that black doesn't have as much control as white does, and of course black's bishops are worse and black's position is worse, and in fact black's king is unsafe as well. So Wesley So already has a slight edge here, and it's nothing major, and the position is still, in fact, well, it's not theory, but it has been played 50 times before, so perhaps both of them knew it already. We have a3 by Wesley chasing the bishop away, bishop to a5, castles, f6, knight to f3, defending the pawn. Now, I think taking immediately wouldn't be as good, because if you can reinforce your central pawn, then do it. And now after bishop to c7, he is forced to take. There's no more ways to defend, so he takes ef6, knight to f6, and now knight to e5 once again. He got his second knight to the same square, and you can see how strong of an outpost this is, especially because now this pawn, the d pawn, is on d5, so you can't dislodge the knight anymore, and the f pawn doesn't exist anymore. So this knight will now have a permanent outpost on e5, unless black wants to give up the bishop pair. And if he does, then the black bishop would have a permanent outpost on e5. So this is positionally just crushing for Wesley So already, and he managed to exploit the single positional weakness in Shirov's position, and now he's going to increase the advantage, and shortly he's going to capitalize on that by transferring it to a material advantage as well. You're going to see that now. This game and the moves so far, of course, have been the opening, but this middle game is extremely instructive. So pay attention to what Wesley So is doing to amplify the quality of his pieces and reduce the scope of Alexey Shirov's pieces. We have castles by Shirov, f4, solidifying the knight. Bishop to d7, of course offering the bishop pair, but taking the light square bishop for this knight would be an absurd idea, and I think white would more than give up all of his advantage. He would in fact be quite worse. Rook to f3, transferring the rook perhaps to g3, to h3, getting into the attack. Bishop to e8, we have queen to c2, now double attacking the h7 pawn, so now black always has to be careful about moving this knight. We have bishop takes e5. Shirov finally decides to do something about the knight, because tactically it was threatening black's king and black's position. We have bishop e5, knight to e4. And now, of course, if you don't take the knight, then the knight is just much better than the bishop. The bishop has no scope. So bishop takes e4. We have d takes e4. And now, even though it doesn't look flashy, one of my favorite Wesley So moves is this rook f to f1. And positionally, this is absolutely brilliant. Engines will tell you that moving the rook or taking the pawn, which is of course free to take, is about the same. The difference is maybe 0.1. So engine-wise, this doesn't make much of a difference. Of course, in this position, white is a pawn up, but black has some compensation. However, of course, after the queen takes on e4, we have bishop to g6 would be played, queen to d4, rook f to d8. Of course, you can't move the a rook because the a7 pawn is weak. And now after queen to b2, rook to d7, rook e1, rook a to d8, you can see that black has a lot of activity, and this bishop has no counterpart in the position. And of course, the bishop on e5 can't challenge the bishop on g6. So black would have more than enough compensation for the pawn. His pieces would in fact be more active than white's pieces. He would have the whole d file, and he would have a very good bishop on the g6 square, and this position simply wouldn't be better for Wesley. So after bishop e4, d takes e4, he doesn't take the pawn, he just moves the rook. And now Wesley So has made a decision not to go material up, but to kill the bishop, which is now on e8 permanently for the rest of the game. So now Alexey Shirov played bishop to g6 anyway. And now if you look at where this bishop can go, there's really no targets in its way. And perhaps this is the only useful diagonal, but perhaps h3, g4, and that is the scope on that diagonal is reduced as well. So positionally, this is just winning for white. And black can hold it off for a while. Black can try to maneuver his pieces to more active squares, but he just doesn't have a chance, because his minor piece is that much worse than white's. Now c5 is played by Wesley. Another very good move, just locking down the position and creating an outpost on d6. So now this bishop can't be dislodged out of d6 or e5. So this is the perfect bishop, absolutely perfect, and this is the worst bishop ever. Now rook f to d8, bishop to d6, queen f7, rook a to d1. Now Wesley is just going to improve the positioning of his pieces. The black bishop is trying to transfer to a more active square, but once again, it's not really useful there. Rook to d7, h3, h5, rook f to d1, queen to g6. And now, of course, Wesley has to be a little careful not to allow any counterplay here. King h2, h4, now he has to defend the g3 square, even though, okay, the e3 pawn would drop, so he has to do it. Queen to f2, queen h5, rook 1 to d2, king to h7, bishop to e5, and now as the moves go by, the position is just getting worse and worse, because Wesley is slowly building up his advantage and slowly bringing his pieces to the perfect squares. Of course, now, once the queen is in the attack, she's no longer supporting the doubling of rooks, and now the move rook a to d8 isn't possible, which would perhaps give Alexey Shirov something close to equality. Rook to f7, just retreating, giving up the d file. Rook to d7, immediately getting to the 7th rank. Rook a f8, rook to d6. King to g8, another inaccuracy by Alexey Shirov, but you can't really suggest a move for black here. And the pieces are so tangled up that black really can't find the move. I mean, what you can play a6 or something. Rook takes f7, rook takes f7, rook to d8 check, king h7, a4, a6, queen to e1. extending the scope of the queen, perhaps preparing to come to c3. Bishop g6, king to g1, bishop to f5, and now Alexey Shirov is simply repeating moves. There's nothing else he can do. Queen f2, bishop g6, king f1. Wesley is getting closer to the center with his king. Rook to f5. Perhaps Shirov has decided that it's enough and that he has to give up the exchange to survive. We have king to e1, bishop e8, queen to d2. Now completely taking control over the center of the board, and once again compare these two pieces, and you can see why Wesley is so much better, even though the material is completely equal. This is just one of the best cases of positional play I've ever seen as white in the Slav defense. And usually players with white are going to try to create a lot of attacking chances, especially in the center with e4 break. But this game is just the complete opposite. And this game is in fact why I began studying the silent variation of the Slav. And I think it's a great way for white to play. We have queen to g6, rook to b8, queen to g3 check. This is just now torture for Alexey Shirov, and I actually felt sorry when I was watching this game. The queens get exchanged, which is amplifying the quality of white's bishop even more. Rook to b6, now this is just winning a pawn, and the conversion is pretty much easy. Rook to d7, bishop to d6, just blocking the path for the rook. e5, f takes e5, giving up a pawn, but what else can you do? Rook to f7, trying to get into f2, and if he takes on g2, then the g-pawn could be dangerous. But now we have e6, gaining a tempo on the rook. Now it really has no time to go to f7 to f2. It does anyway, but now bishop takes g3, and now if he takes on g2, which he does, isn't really a threat. Bishop f4, g5, chasing the bishop away. But now king to f1, attacking the rook as a counter attack, and now rook to c2, bishop takes g5. This was in fact a blunder of a pawn, and now, I mean, I don't have to comment on the rest of the moves. This is just completely lost. He's threatening to queen in a couple of moves. Rook to b8, rook to e5, rook to f8, checking the king. And after king to g4, Wesley plays king to g2, just threatening checkmate. And now, of course, rook to f4 would be mate. So Shirov would have to play something like bishop to g6 to be able to retreat. But just a sad lost position. Okay. I hope you got something from this game. I would like to highlight how he managed to get such a dominant position. And if you go back to this position after knight to e5, which is a common square for the knight in the London system, in the Slav, usually in the positions when there's this pawn triangle, usually like this, the knight on e5 is one of the on e5. I'm sorry, is one of the strongest weapons white has. And Wesley So actually managed to get the other knight to reinforce the square as well. And then when the exchange happened, when he could have won a pawn, here he didn't. And this is, I think, such a brilliant conception that after this move, after rook f to f1, from a human perspective, this position is just lost for black. So I hope you enjoyed the game. I hope you got something. I hope you at least got something about the Slav defense. And thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye.